Executive session vote, which means the public is not asked for comment or question on this. The board will talk amongst themselves. If we have any questions, we would bring any department heads up or Mr. Tetra or other elected officials. But we will be voting on both the town sign and the Board of Education budget tonight. There may or may not be some discussion through the board. This may be a late night. This may be an early evening. We'll have to wait and see. Would everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? And a little surprise tonight. One of our newest members has a birthday this evening. So Mrs. Cook Littman, in honor of her birthday and her first budget vote, will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So we usually have the other newest member sing happy birthday, but Mr. Mottola has begged off for the evening, and we were all thankful for that. So here's how we're going to play it tonight. First of all, this is a little quirk in our system, and it gets a little bit confusing, some years more confusing than other, which is we hear the entire budget along with the Board of Selectmen, and then they actually get to vote before us, do all the easy pickings, and then we're actually looking at different numbers by the time it comes back to us. So what we've started to do in previous years is have Mrs. Gardner or Mr. Mayor kind of step us through the adjustments that the Board of Selectmen has made so that we understand exactly the numbers that are before us and all the easy pickings that those guys did. And the next thing we'll do is there's a schedule here that is our beautiful internal service fund schedule. And you'll recall, we talked about this at the beginning budget cycle, a lot of the estimates, particularly on the medical side, are done based on December experience. They then get updated, and we get better numbers on which to cast our votes tonight. So that update has happened within the last 5 days, and we have that schedule here, and I'd ask Mr. Mayor to walk us through that schedule. After we get done with those two items, any follow-up questions or comments that the board has, we'll direct to Mr. Mayor and Mrs. Gardner, just to make sure we're all on the same page. Then I'll call for a vote on the budget as a whole. And what we'll do is we'll put the budget in play, and we'll flip page by page. Now, my intent is not to vote on every department, but rather only vote on the departments where somebody has an adjustment. And then at the end of the entire budget, we can vote on the entire budget at one time, and that solves all our issues. It's faster, it's cleaner, and it makes sure that our amendments are kept. Does that sound good with everybody? All right. With that, I'll turn it over to you guys to walk us through the Board of Selectmen's adjustments, please.
All right. Am I on?
You are.
All right. Okay. The Board of Selectmen made a few adjustments, not a significant amount, so this won't take very long. Legal services reduced the budget from $450,000, excuse me, from $500,000 to $450,000, a reduction of $50,000. That was based upon the cyclical nature of assessment appeal cases, and so I thought there might be a little bit excess budget for those, where we don't expect a large volume of those until fiscal year 17. We received updated information, not updated, but final information on the OPEB trust accounts, and that resulted in 3 adjustments, one to OPEB town account, one to OPEB fire and police account, 2 adjustments actually. And then also, when we reviewed the 401A, there was an under accrual there of about $50,000. So there was a savings of $97,000 OPEB town, savings of $16,000 OPEB police and fire, and an increase in expenditures, or budgeted expenditures in the 401A of $50,000. The net of those 3 is negative 63, positive, a favorable $63,000. The town health insurance, which we'll go into in the next item when we go through the internal service fund, there was a $198 charge $190 increase, that was based upon the February claims. Private school busing was increased by $60,000. This was the correction of a transposition error in the original budget. Apologies from the Finance Department. In the Fire Department, we have the Deputy Chief of Board. His salary was $9,637 greater than what was budgeted. So that's an increase in the budget, and then also the related Social Security expenditure to that, $140. The Fire Department indicated there was software in their budget, software licensing that they're not using, that they weren't going to pay for, so that was a savings of $5,000 for a net negative to the Fire Department budget of $4,777. ECC had $14,098 in their budget for a regional radio system for which they received a grant, so that $14,098 was removed as a savings to the budget. There was updated information from the DPW capital expenditure item. There were 2 trucks that the final bids or cost expectations came in less than what was in the budget. That was a savings of $72,000. And then there was a brush bucket attachment for a payloader, which was removed from the budget, a savings of $19,500 for a total savings from the DPW budget of $91,500. And then on the Board of Ed side, again on the health care, because of the health care February experience, there was an increase in the Board of Ed budget to compensate for that of $367,579. And then on the WPCA side of the budget, there were 2 adjustments, one for the health insurance update, one for the OPEB. The health insurance update was an additional $9, using the February information, claims experience information, and being $7,854 for a total OPEB adjustment of a savings of $7,845. And that's that.
Any
Questions?
questions on the Board of Selectmen actions? Seeing none, can we refer to the internal service fund schedules, Mr. Mayor, and walk us through the updated information, please?
Now, this is, this was sent out today. It was also, I handed out a copy that's on your, on the table in front of each of you. This is something we can spend a long time on, but I'm going to try to do a clear, comprehensive, but quick, full analysis. I'd like to start with the top right number on page 1. Top right number on page 1 shows that the total fund, well, let me, an introduction, in case, just so everybody understands who's listening on TV or in the audience. The Internal Service Fund is the fund where the town accounts for town active medical, Board of Ed active medical, and workers' comp claims, general liability claims, and it's treated as one item on our annual financial statements and looked at as one item by the rating agencies. The fund balance of this account, i.e. the liabilities greater than the assets, was a negative $1,422,000 at the beginning of this fiscal year. That's July 1, 2014. Based upon, I'm going to based upon the experience through February, which is page 3, Again, I'm going to start on the right-hand column, and then I'm going to move to the left. If you go down to the near bottom of the page, the fourth line from the bottom, you see there is a net loss of $666,000, which, going to the line below that, means that based upon current projections, the fund balance of the Internal Service Fund will deteriorate by the $666,000. That $666,000 is made up of, going to the left of the $666,000 number, a negative $1,553,000 result in the Board of Ed, medical, a positive $387,000 result, projected result in the town active medical, and a positive approximately $500,000 result in the risk management fund. One note on the $500,000, that is the result of $500,000 that was added to this account by this board after lots of conversation last budget year. The loss of $1.5 million, the use of the Board of Ed reserve, was budgeted. So they're actually on budget, if you will, okay? Because they had budgeted a loss in this fiscal year of $1.5 million. Now, carrying the projection of June 30, 2015, fiscal year 15, through to the projection for fiscal year 2016, the budget year that we are looking at. If you turn to, it says page 2 at the top. It surprises me. It's the fourth page of my book. It says projected, just make sure we're on the same page. Projected July 1, 2015, June 30, 2016, using, this is the wrong one, excuse me, page 4. Excuse me, page 4.
Mr. Mayor, what you're going to point out is we've had, using December experience, we were roughly even. The town was down in the budget by about $59,000, and the Board of Ed was down by about $83,000. And that's because their original projections had been done based on November experience for their budget, correct?
Yeah, basically, I was going to skip over that because it's history and it's kind of irrelevant, but
it's what's in- but it was
yes,
the basis
but it was the
for-
basis for the budget, and actually the experience at the Board of Ed for the first 6 months of this fiscal year was very positive, and then it turned around.
Correct.
And I don't remember if these numbers are through December, not November. Then it turned around and reverted back to what was projected originally in the budget.
But-
Reverted to the projected amount.
But when you turn it to February, which is new information,
Right, that's page 4.
that deficit balloons from 83,671 this year to 462,789,
Correct.
709, rather. And-
Correct.
And the town side stays roughly the same at $59,000.
Right. The first comment I want to make is the $462,000 number has not been adjusted for the $367,000 addition that was made at the Board of Selectmen meeting.
Right, so it's
So if
roughly
you take that, so it's $95,000. The $95,000 that is projected to be the loss for the Board of Ed Medical, and the $59,000 that is projected on this sheet of paper as the loss for the town, represent the change in accrual. The budget is, the budgeted numbers are strictly based upon the cash flow projections, but this is an accrual account, is reported in our CAFR, and so the net loss in this account, current projection, with the Board of, in the full account, with the, incorporating the Board of Selectmen change, would be $155,000.
Okay.
That would be a deterioration from this year. The other point I would like to make out, I want to go back to the very first number that I pointed to on page 1, upper right-hand corner. 1,422,000 is the deficit balance of this account at the beginning of the current fiscal year. If everything plays out as estimated and projected, that number at the end of June 30, at the end of the fiscal year 16, June 30, 2016, would be about $2,250,000 for a deterioration in the account from the beginning of this fiscal year to the end of next fiscal year of about $700,000, $850,000.
So now, when we started talking with the Board of Education about this account, just so that I can be clear, the premise, and I think even Dr. Tittle had quoted me on this, was do no harm. So essentially, what we wanted for the Board of Education as it relates to the next fiscal year was for the line that's labeled net profit and loss to be as close to zero as possible. Now, we'd love it to be positive so that it actually improved the fund balance. But we realized that that was going to be a tall stretch, and so it was do no harm. And we were kind of hoping for the same thing on the town side. But we had specifically spoken to the Board of Education, correct?
Right. There is a difference between the town side. Again, reminding the board and myself that the account is taken and looked at by the rating agency as a whole with all
Understand.
three accounts. But there is a positive balance on the town side of $4 million, negative balance on the Board of Ed side.
I understand. It's
Right.
as a whole, though,
Right.
and what we're trying to
But
do
to
is not
make it whole.
necessarily manage that, but really
Right.
manage the
Yes.
day-to-day operation of it.
Yes.
And we were in the mode of do no harm, right? And we knew that we would have some potential adjustments as we got best available information as we move through this process, right?
Correct statement.
All right. So, and right now, you're saying that the page 4, we have to actually add back 367, though, so that 462, 709 negative is actually sitting at about $95,000
Correct statement.
today. All right. And the town side is still sitting at 59 negative.
Correct as well.
Okay. Mr. DeWitt, please.
And just so I'm clear, the only reason it's at 95,000 is because the Board of Selectmen added 367,000 and roughly change in their budget.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. I took that note, I just wasn't sure.
Any
You got
other
it.
questions on this right now? All right. If there are none, and thank you, Mr. Mayor, for going through that with us, and Mrs. Gardner, thank you for your assistance as well. We can go to the front of the budget book and start with revenue, and I'd ask somebody to put the budget before us. Can I ask Mr. DeWitt, can I have a second? Mr. Stone. So the budget is now before us in its entirety. We'll go through revenue. I'll just call out for any adjustments to revenue. Then we'll go page by page. We'll vote on the adjustments, not on the individual budget. And then we'll vote on the budget as a whole. Is everybody good?
Yep.
Yeah, we'll do Board of Ed at the end. Okay. So, do I have any adjustments to revenue? Mr. Becker?
Thank you. I'd like to make an adjustment on the conveyance fee line.
Okay.
And,
Conveyance fees?
yeah, I'm looking for a moment.
Mrs. Gardner, if you could give us some help?
Page
Yeah.
51 or 52.
Yeah, that's what I'm,
That's what I would have thought, yeah.
Town,
Page 53?
page 53.
There we go.
Right in the middle.
yep. All right, so that's going to be, yeah, page 53, under Town Clerk. 1001, and then 42312, town clerk conveyance taxes. I'd like to make a motion to raise that by $50,000.
Do I have a second to that? Mr. Brown seconds it. That item is now before us, raising that one line item by $50,000. Comments, questions, anybody? Seeing none? Oh, Mr. Matola, I missed you.
That's all right. Can you explain why you want to do that?
Yeah, we had a discussion, I think at our last meeting, and some additional information was supplied, looking at the history, and looking at the last few years and where this is trending. I'm comfortable that these still kind of keep it in a conservative range that we'll be okay with. It's minor, and I feel that we'll be able to meet that.
Anybody else? Seeing none? All in favor of this adjustment? Opposed? Abstentions? That item carries. Still in revenue. I'll take one myself here. I had the occasion to reach out to Mr. Connolly today and spoke to him about building department permits. And he was comfortable with 3 adjustments, which total $49,000. He later confirmed these in a discussion with Mr. Mayor. And those are electrical permits, that's line item 1005, 42113, and I'm sorry, that's page 38, and that's $20,000.
Increasing it?
$20,000, correct. Another line item is right below that, 1005, 42114. I need glasses. Plumbing permits, and that's $12,000. And then several line items down below that, line number 42117, building, and that's heating permits. Now, I called up Mr. Connolly and asked him about how we were trending for this year. If you recall, he was very confident in the numbers for this year. He was trending very well. Also, he was able to tick off the top of his head many, many building projects that were on tap that he knew were in various stages of potential permitting. So I won't lie, I twisted his arm a little bit. And his one caveat to me on this was, Tom, I don't want you to come back at me if the building permits actually come in June as opposed to July. And therefore, I'm over this year and under that year, last year. So I told him I have his back on that. But that was his only rationale on that. So I don't want to put words in his mouth, so I'll say I feel pretty comfortable. And any slings and arrows should be directed my way, should that happen. So with that, I'll ask for a second to my motion. Mr. Brown?
What's the total increase, Mr. Ray?
Total increase is $49,000. He wouldn't quite give me that extra $1,000.
Not a team player.
So, yeah. So does anybody have any questions or further comments on that motion? Okay. Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? Abstention? That carries as well. Let's continue with revenue. Does anybody have any other comments, questions, concerns, or adjustments to revenue line items? All right, I see none. We'll go on to the expense side. What I intend to do is flip directly through the book and call department by department. We won't call a vote on each department, but if there is an adjustment to that department, we will stop, hear it out like we just did, and then call a vote on that amendment. Okay? All right, so we'll go, and Mrs. Gardner, feel free to correct me if I skip anything here. We'll start in the first selectman's office. Before I discuss salaries here, are there any questions, comments, or adjustments in the first selectman's office? Okay, seeing none. In the past, this board has set the salaries for the first selectman and the board of selectmen. It was our understanding that that was our responsibility, and that was actually precedent set for this town for many, many years. Through consultation with our town council and looking at the charter and the state statutes, we had it wrong for a many number of years. It's actually the board of selectmen that sets their own salaries. Must be nice. So we're not going to vote on that tonight. And what's going to happen is the Board of Selectmen, per my understanding, is going to impanel a subcommittee of 4 people, 2 representatives from the RTM, 2 representatives from this board, to make a recommendation to the Board of Selectmen as to what they should do with their own salaries. And then they will take a formal vote. Being that this will be after our budget vote, any adjustment to their salaries, which will be for the successive 4-year period, i.e. their term, will be taken out of contingency for this 1 year, and then it'll be appropriately budgeted in those salary line items in the successive 3 years. Okay? Mr. Mayor, is that your understanding of how that's going to work as well?
Yes, sir.
And is Mr. Tetro, I saw him earlier. Did I say that correctly? Okay. So we're good there. All right? So any other questions, comments on the selectmen? Okay, seeing none, we'll go to the town clerk's department. And we do set the town clerk's salary. So do we have a motion there? All right. Mrs. Leclerc?
I'd like to make a motion that we set the town clerk's salary for the first 2 years for $96,000, and for the second 2 years, $99,000. And I guess we came up with these numbers based on a review of town clerks throughout the state. We wanted to give her an increase, but that position remains in the top salaries for that position. So that's how we came to those numbers.
Do I have a second to that? We have Mr. DeWitt seconding that. So this is to actually adjust the town clerk's salary, not only for this budget cycle, which would be the $96,000, but also setting it for the remainder of her 4-year term, the 4-year term, of $96,000 for 2 years, and then $99,000 for the last 2 years, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Does anybody have comments, questions on this item? Mr. Walsh?
Based on those numbers are consistent with what department heads have been getting. And I think if you annualize them, they're closer to 2% for every year, which is, when I had Mr. Mayor send me the department head increases that the first selectman has been setting, and that's consistent with that, about a 2% increase a year for the 4-year term. So based on that, I think that's a conservative number. I'm glad we did compare it against what town clerks are getting statewide, but I think that's consistent with that.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Any other questions, comments, or concerns? Mr. Becker?
Yeah, thank you. Just make kind of a broad one that kind of touches on this, and that I think that 4 years from now, heading into the budget cycle, maybe a little bit earlier on, we can have kind of that, maybe, well, we'll see where the first selectman, salary, I guess that's moving to them, but have this conversation a little bit further out, maybe even outside of the budget. We have more time to focus. One of the things that I'm seeing happening with department heads in relation to particularly the first selectman and the town clerk is sort of, there's a spread that's happening where department heads, we're getting a little bit closer with this, but there was a period of time where they were going up certainly more than them, and now there's kind of a gap that's there. But you're also seeing, if you look at some of the middle manager contracts in the departments, had a contraction on there where the middle managers are catching up to them. And I think that at some point, kind of as we've gone through this recessionary period and kept department heads and some of the electeds down, but some of the unions were able to kind of eventually move up, you're going to find maybe a rebalancing that needs to occur somewhere in there. And for these salaries, first selectman and town clerk, you can't really touch them outside of the electoral period, so they're going to be done now. But it is an issue that's only going to get worse across the board. So I would hope that we, in the future, kind of have that a little bit earlier and try to fix that, because it is only going to get worse. But I'll certainly support this tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Becker. Any other comments? Mr. Mottola?
Just so I understand, so as of July 1st, the salary will be adjusted to $96,000 for 2 years,
Correct.
and then the last 2 years, it's at 99.
Correct.
Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Tetra.
Thank you. But just to clarify a couple things from a process standpoint. One, just for clarity, The department head salaries are actually set by the Board of Selectmen, not by the First Selectman. Second,
That always been done? Because when I was on the Board of Selectmen with you, we weren't doing that. We weren't having those brought to us.
when I took office,
Yeah.
I was explained to me that the First Selectman set those. So the first year I was in office, we did it just that way.
Okay.
And possibly the second year. But the Section 5.2, which I came across in perusing the charter, clearly says the Board of Selectmen set the salaries for the town officers. So we started doing it with the Board of Selectmen voting on it. And forgive me, I guess just after you left, but
So can I go back and
So-
look at that again?
so for the last 2 years, that's what we've been doing. Second, as much as it is the Board of Selectmen voting on the Board of Selectmen salaries, it's not voting on the current Board of Selectmen salaries.
Correct.
The salaries take place not on July 1st, but, and Linda, you'll have to tell me which date it is, but it's after the election. So technically, it's being set for the next Board of Selectmen. All right, and I just wanted to clarify the timing of that.
I think he or she will thank you for that. Thank you, Mr. Tetra, for the clarification. Much appreciated.
And I would just like to lastly add that historically, we'd just gone through a kind of a tough time. They're coming off a period of time, both Mike and his job as first selectman and the town clerk, where the previous 4 years, they'd received 3% increase in 4 years. So technically, if you looked at it over the 4 years, they'd received
Correct.
0.75%.
Correct.
So I think it's fair to look at that now and to start adjusting it appropriately.
Agreed. Agreed. Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Okay, so I'm going to call for a vote just on setting the town clerk's salary. And Mrs. Gardner, you can then adjust the budget for this, correct? Okay. So, all in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? That carries. So, Mrs. Gardner, you'll make that adjustment.
Along with Social Security.
Correct, along with the related benefits.
Just a question.
Sure.
Yep, when setting that, because it's actually not going to be that.
Administrative services, please flag me if I go too fast. Registrar of Voters. Zoning Board of Appeals.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to respectfully recuse myself to, as I told you during the budget process and the rest of the board, to avoid the appearance of an impropriety, since I have to appear before some of the next boards. Just to avoid the appearance of an impropriety, I'm going to step out of the room and not vote on any of these. The Zoning Board of Appeals, Town Planning and Zoning, Probate Court, Historic District, Conservation.
We might come get you.
That's great. If you don't, that's fine too.
Thanks, Mr. Walsh. So Town Planning and Zoning? Probate Court. Historic District Commission. The Conservation Department.
Yep. I'd like to make.
Mr.
motion,
Becker, thank you.
And I'm actually going to need some help, Mrs. Gardner, on this one. So, first thing, I'd like to take the $31,004 for the Wetlands Compliance Officer and move that over into contingency. But with that, there's going to be some benefit numbers, I believe our overall Social Security, certainly. So if you could just, if we could get that info.
Mr. Becker, would you like to speak to it a little bit?
Yeah, so I'm certainly, I'm in support of this, I you know, in concept, but we've got a new director that's coming on board, and I'd like to see, I think in any situation where you get a new department head, get their eyes on it, let them really look at this and decide. I mean, you know, maybe they'll find out that they don't need it, but if they do, maybe they'll find that they really, truly, in order to do this, they need the full-time. Maybe they're okay with the part-time. I really want to get them into the department and let them come back. But I don't want to do it as some sort of a reduction, because that would kind of, you know, cut it out for the entire year. I want to give them the tools that they know that they can come back and come back to the board, you know, and ask for it if they need it, or if in any other sort of structure, it gives them the tools to be able to do that.
Thank you. Do
I'd
I have a
certainly
second
welcome
for Mr.
them to do
Becker's motion? Mr. DeWitt. Mr. Tetra, you have a comment?
Mr. Chair, just a little bit better explanation. If I understand the dynamics of this, this is a move that doesn't impact the tax rate or the mill rate.
Correct. That's what he said, correct.
Yep.
So I'm at a loss as to explain why we would do this. It appears to be the Conservation Director will be on board on or about May 1st. This money can't be spent until July 1st.
Yep.
So the Conservation Director, in running his budget, has the time to evaluate this and decide if it's needed. Not sure what the point of moving it out of his budget into contingency and then having him come back here. This board has the financial obligations to manage the town, but not to make personnel decisions or functional decisions within a department. So I was just trying to get an understanding of what the objective was.
Sure. Mr. Becker, would you like to speak to that? Or
Yeah, no, I understand that. I think that we're certainly sensitive to any of the personnel increases, and I think we're saying that if they truly do need it, then let them come back, and certainly in my view, we'll move it over. But with that change, I think it would be helpful to put it into the contingency account, since there's sort of kind of an unknown that's there at this time. I think that I kind of stated it. I don't know. I don't need to kind of rehash it. I'm certainly I'm comfortable with moving it over. I mean, if certainly people, if anybody else on the board isn't, let them vote accordingly. We're saying that they've got the resources if they truly need it. But with any new department head coming in, certainly within this department that was under one person for so long, I'm not sure what they're actually going to end up needing when they come in.
Thank you, Mr. Becker.
I just
I'll go to Ms. Lippman, and then I'll go to the birthday girl, and then I'll go to Mr. Stone.
Thank you. I can't support this change to the budget. I feel that the Conservation Department, when they came in to speak with us about the budget, clearly demonstrated that they're short-staffed. They were looking for a full-time staff member, and I feel that giving them a part-time staff member really was a responsible decision by the Board of Selectmen, that it will allow the department to spend the year with some additional hands, and then next year when there's a new director, they can evaluate if part-time was enough, or if they do need full-time, or if they need another part-time. But I really feel they've already demonstrated to us that the need is there. The community that's impacted by the Conservation Department has reached out to all of us. I know we're all seeing the same emails requesting the full-time person right now, which actually I would not have supported. I really do believe that a part-time was the best decision right now, and then we could reevaluate next year. But I would really hate to see the Conservation Department have to come back and make the same case to us again that I believe they've already made. Thank you.
Mr. Stone.
The birthday girl took the wind out of my sails. I was going to say the same thing. The Conservation Department, to me, made a very compelling argument for this position, and I think we should support it as it is in the budget at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Stone. Mr. Mottola.
So from a process standpoint, I tend to agree with my colleagues here on this. So if you moved it over to contingency, and let's say the new guy comes aboard on May 1st and looks at this and says, boy, I could really use that part-timer, he would have to come back to this board, right, and say, can you move the 31 grand back in? That could only happen after July 1st, right?
Correct.
Okay. All right, thanks.
And, by the way, go ahead, Ms. Leclerc, please.
You can go ahead.
Please.
Well, I just want to say is I'm not convinced a part-time position is what we need, and once you hire a person, then that's the person we have. It's hard to then go ahead and hire a full-time. So I'd rather give the new director time to evaluate the department, see what his needs really are, and then come back and ask us for the position he really needs.
Mr. Becker.
Yeah, and you know, Mrs. Leclerc brings up kind of another thought, which I think I kind of put out there, in that I want to, on my end, I'd like to hear what they need. I mean, we've done some things before where we partial fund basically halfway through the year on the hire and then end up getting with the full-time at the end of the day. That may be the route here. I think that if we just kind of let it go through in its context right now, it's kind of going to get stuck there in the part-time, and that may ultimately be it. And I think that letting the new person come in, they're going to have some time before this year starts to evaluate, and I, like I said, I encourage them to come to us and let us know one way or another sort of their structure, and then we can support them in making sure that their department is being run right. I think it could be potentially used as a tool in there. That's just, but again, it brings the conversation back to this board versus passing and just kind of being through it.
Thank you, Mr. Becker. Mrs. Cook-Littman.
So correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Chair, but it sounds like changes can be made during the year if a department is finding difficulty. So it seems to me that we should go ahead and have the part-time position, and then if they're still really struggling, they can still come back and make a case to us. But I still don't see the point in not changing the tax base for our community, and also not giving the Conservation Department the position that they really do seem to need.
Thank you. Mr. DeWitt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I agree, Ms. Cook-Littman, with your statement that the Conservation Department made a compelling case for this person. But I also agree with my colleagues, my other colleagues, that you know, this is the department that had a very long-standing department head and ran the department in the way he felt best. It doesn't appear to me, anyway, to be a really big deal to come to us and say, listen, I have analyzed the group, and I think I want to come here and reallocate that money that you guys had, you know, put into contingency. And I will say that I'm frankly uncomfortable with rushing into a hiring of a part-time person before the person has had time to, you know, get into the role. So I don't see that we've really changed anything here. Yes, have we added one meeting to this gentleman or lady's meeting agendas before July? Yes, but hopefully we will see this person before that time anyway. And when he or she comes before me, I'll be the first one to make a motion to move this money from contingency to their department.
Okay. Any other? Mr. Mottola.
Let me ask, maybe this is too much of a hypothetical question. Is there going to be a commitment from this board then not to add to next year's budget? What if this department head comes to us in July and says, I want a full-time person here? Is this board prepared then to?
Well, we
move
wouldn't
monies?
add, in that instance, you wouldn't add to the budget. What you would do would take out the
You would take it out
appropriate
of
funds in
contingency.
contingency.
I understand that, but it's not,
Well, I mean, it's a
using
big difference.
contingency's money. It is a difference, I understand that,
Yeah.
and maybe I misspoke, but it's using contingency monies that we weren't anticipating using for a specific position, and that's a
It could
that's
be.
a concern that I have.
It
that's
actually could be, but it maybe not, because it could be, the person could just come and say, hey, instead of the part-time position, I want to wait until
all. That's true.
October, November, December, and hire them full-time and fund it with that 31,000,
Okay.
right? Or they could say, no, I actually do need that part-time and that 31,000. So what it does, the way I'm viewing it, is it gives the new person the flexibility to come in, to evaluate what they need out of the department structure, and say, in structuring the department this way, I either do need this, or by the way, I need something else. And it allows that person another lever. Whereas if we put this in, we're actually funding the position.
You're funding the position, it's a part-time position, which is my understanding, doesn't have any union affiliation, we can get rid of it whenever we want to, first of all.
Maybe, I'm not getting into that, because that never seems to happen, but
I
yeah.
think that's true. Yeah, I hear, I think that's true. I kind of agree with your logic, but in a different way, because there was a case given by the the conservation people, and I know there's no department head there, but there are experienced people there who've been there for many years who said, gee, we need a full-timer here. And the first selectman, and through his budget, said, well, we'll give you a part-timer. We know there's a need there. I think everyone does agree there's probably a need there. And the way I looked at it is, let's give them the part-timer, and then let the new guy come in and say, okay, this is working out, this isn't working out, maybe we do need a full-timer, and that would be appropriated for next budget season. I guess my only concern is a new guy who comes on board, it's going to take him a while to get up to speed on certain things, and you know, quite frankly, he may not be getting to this for a little while, and some of the work wouldn't be done. So that's my only concern.
Thank you, Mr. Mottola. Mr. DeWitt?
Just let us not lose sight of the fact that, and I could be wrong on the exact number of years, but I think it's 4 or 5 maybe, that this department's been asking for this head, and the first selectman, maybe 2 first selectmen, have continually said no thank you in their budget, you know. I do commend Mr. Tetro for his 50%. I'm with you on that. But it doesn't minimize the fact that we've done this at least 5 years, I'm pretty sure, through multiple first selectmen, and we've never funded this. We have never gone over and overruled the first selectman on that particular position.
Okay, so I think we've talked this out.
Yeah, that's fine.
Let's take a vote on this one, and we'll move on.
About the numbers, red line?
Please.
Yes, please.
Mr. Becker, please get this, and whoever seconded his vote, please, or his,
And we thank you for talking enough so we could
Exactly.
calculate the numbers.
it was a, we call that filibustering, yes. Go ahead, Mrs. Gardner.
So,
Okay, you would be reducing line 51030 in the Conservation Department by 31,004.
Yes, please.
Sorry. In the Conservation Department, you would be reducing line 51030, part-time account, by 31,004. You would also be reducing Social Security, Object 52200, by $449. The total reduction in that department would be 31,453. And you would be increasing the contingency account, line item 58010, by the 31,453.
okay, so that's my motion.
That's your motion, and do we have a second
Numbers,
to that?
take that.
Mr. DeWitt, okay, all in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Okay, Mr. Walsh is an abstention. Okay, anything else in conservation?
That was
5-3.
5-3-1, thank you.
You don't want to record Mr. Walsh,
Yeah, right, he recused himself, I know.
so he literally didn't vote.
Right, thank you.
Yeah.
Boy, why don't you just come sit up here tonight? All right.
It helps to go through the budget and stay ahead of
All right. So also in conservation, this would be line 57000, which would be item number 2 under the capital outlay on page 102, and that is the SUV. So I'd like to make a motion to reduce that by 28,000.
Do we have a second to that motion? Mrs. Leclerc, there's a second. So that item is now before us.
And if I may, Mr. Chairman.
Please.
On that, we've looked at the amount of now actually SUVs instead of just cars coming off of PD. And we've done this in a number of other areas over the years and would like for one of their Explorer-sized vehicles to be, when they come off this year, to go to conservation. And that would be a comparable, actually slightly larger size vehicle than the Escape. And again, we've done this a number of different times throughout departments. It seems to be a good fit. Instead of having to go out and buy a brand new one, take one of the PD vehicles. It still certainly has a lot of life in it. And we do this, again, all the time in departments. So I think that'd be a good use of resources down the line.
Thank you, Mr. Becker. Do you have any comments, questions on this item?
Yes.
So I'm going to go to Mrs. Lippman, Mrs. Cook Lippman. You can come on up, Mr. Tetra. Yes, you can. Mrs. Cook-Lippman, do you want to ask your question first?
No, I'd rather hear from him first. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joe Michelangelo, Director of Public Works. In working with the police department, there are 8 vehicles that are going to be put out of service and trickle down to other departments. And Jeff Cornwall, our fleet manager, works with the police department and all the departments to try to allocate where they go best. And the 2 Ford SUVs from the police department that are going to be put out of service, one was envisioned to go to the police department, to go to the building inspector's office to replace one of their vehicles, which they have all Crown Vics, so a SUV would fit them nicely. And the other one was envisioned to go to the Public Works Department to be used by the tree warden, replace another SUV. So these are vehicles that other departments did not budget or put in request for, with the assumption that they would be trickled down to them.
Thank you. Anyone else on this item? Mr. Brown?
Mr. Michelangelo, not so quick. Thank you for your comments. We have actually an email from you based on a question that was asked from Mr. Walsh. And he asked for a list of all town hall departments and an older vehicle list. So on this list, and maybe you could help us and walk us through it.
Yep.
There's a lot of town cars, right?
Correct.
It's quite a list for quite a few departments, including the tax department, the health, TPZ, DPW, building, and this list includes vehicles that are older, 1998 up to 2006. But a lot of the vehicles have 25,000 miles on it, 30,000. So there's not a lot of miles on these cars. Okay.
Well, correct, yeah, on both the ones that the towns have purchased and the ones that got handed down from the PDs. So if you look at that list there, the Civics, which were bought in the late 90s, are the natural gas vehicles, and they're getting long in tooth near their end of their life, especially with their cylinders involved in the natural gas vehicles. So they're pretty close to 20 years, and it's almost like the propane gas grill thing, where it's only certified for so long, and you have to get them certified and redone. So those vehicles are near their end of their service life, and correct, there is not very much mileage on them, but the departments that use them, I believe the health department has 4, the building inspector's office has 4, planning and zoning has 4. So their staff is out all the time, and the lack of mileage is, and for the health department, they do, the restaurants along Black Rock Turnpike, along Route 1, septic inspections in Greenfield Hills, and, very rarely, except for Mr. Cleary, do they leave Fairfield at all. So that's why it's a result of low mileage. But those Civics are the result. Their replacement is more geared because they're natural gas vehicles.
I'm not saying, because I don't know, if the departments, how many cars are needed in this town. I'm just saying we have a lot of town. Matter of fact, do you know how many town vehicles we have?
Well, just town hall ones or in general?
In general? Well, forget the police department, maybe just town hall.
Okay.
Do you know how many we have?
In DPW?
And DPW.
Okay, I'll talk about in town hall itself, and once again, you could add the departments that I've mentioned. In town hall, there's probably around, I'd say somewhere around 18 or 20 vehicles for town hall staff that are used between Independence Hall and Old Town Hall. And some of those are pool vehicles, like the IT guy and the assessor's office share some vehicles when the personnel needs to go up to Hartford. They pool vehicles, they don't have their own. In Public Works, we count everything rolling stock, from trailers to rollers to anything that has a license plate. So we have upwards of I believe about 170 pieces of rolling stock, but once again, they're not all drivable vehicles. Some of them are construction type vehicles.
170?
170, 170.
But that includes trucks.
Trailers, trucks, cars.
Okay. But do you know how many cars there are? See,
No-
here's my point. My point, there's a lot of vehicles. I mean, 8 are coming off from the police department. It seems like we can work something out where we don't need to buy a new vehicle when we have 8 coming off and you have all these other vehicles. And that's the point, I believe, of the motion.
And just, if you see the list that I provided on here, if you look at the 2 of the vehicles that are coming off, they are, a 2006 Crown Victoria and 2 2006 Crown Victorias. So those vehicles aren't that old, but by nature of being in service for 3 years in the police department with mileage plus running time, they've only lasted 6 years as town cars. So same thing, if we're talking about handing down one of these police vehicles, we can't figure on getting 12 or 15 years out of them. We're buying ourselves 6 years, but we'd be
I understand.
looking for more.
Now, the Crown Vic has 70,000 miles on it. Right? I mean, that just doesn't seem like a lot of miles.
Correct, but once again, when the police department turns it over to us, the big wear and tear is mileage. They literally they're running hours, excuse me. So they don't drive far, but they're running constantly for,
They're probably running 24 hours.
pretty close to it for 3 years. I'm sure they
Yep.
get shut down
But there's,
sometimes.
go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Mr. Flynn, go ahead.
No, go right ahead.
But there's 70, 80,000 miles, I mean, total. I know they're running, but they're at 80,000 miles. It's not like there's 150,000 miles. I mean, my car is 133,000 miles. I know they have different, it's been through a much different life than my car.
Yeah,
Okay,
and the transmission in your car is better than these 2 vehicles. I guarantee you that, without ever seeing your 130,000-mile car.
Well, mine's a Honda. This is a Ford. Maybe that's the difference. I don't. But the point is, it's 80,000.
Yeah.
All right. So we have 8 cars coming off. There's 80,000 miles here, and it just seems that we have enough vehicles throughout the system where we don't have to buy a brand new vehicle for $30,000. That's what it looks like. Thank you, Mr. Flynn.
Thank you. Mr. Stone?
Just to point out, I mean, we're talking $28,000. You take one of these older cars, you don't know what the repair costs are going to be on these cars, and they're not fuel efficient like the newer cars. So I don't...
Natural gas.
What?
I think they're natural gas.
Are they?
Well,
That's what he said.
well, the
natural gas ones are...
The 90
Fuel efficient,
the old Hondas, which are going to be replaced, are the natural gas vehicles. But correct, the Crown Vics that get handed down to us,
Can I ask a question?
those only get like 12 miles per
Why
gallon.
are we replacing cars that are almost 20 years old that have 25, 30,000, and 60,000 miles on them?
Well,
I'm not saying we're replacing those cars now, but why would we even need to?
well, those are the natural gas vehicles.
I don't care what they are.
Well,
They got 20,000, 30,000, 60,000 miles on them. We've had them for 18 years.
Yeah, because the certification is lapsing on the tanks, and we.
I get the reason, okay, why we would retire them. It's not why we would retire them, it's why would we replace them?
Well, because.
Why do you need them?
Well, because town staff are using them, so there's.
They're only using them to the tune of 30,000 miles over 18 years.
Okay, well, I'll let, Mr. Cleary's here, I know, I don't know if Mr. Conley's here, or anybody for planning and zoning, but their staff needs to be out on the road doing their jobs, and they need vehicles to go out there and do them. By nature of the fact that their trips are, they could, once again, yeah, I could visit every restaurant in this town and probably put 20 miles on my car, so it's not the number of miles you're going. It's the
Clearly
number of
haven't gone to
trips.
all the restaurants in this town.
Well, if you go 50 feet at a time, or 100 feet at a time.
Okay.
I'm trying, though.
Thank you, Mr. Nicolanzo. Anybody else? I think. Okay. Mrs. Leclerc?
Do we have any kind of mileage reimbursement policy? Like, does everyone need a town car to do town business, or?
Well, we do have a mileage reimbursement policy, and I know just by nature of the fact that in engineering, when we are short vehicles, sometimes, and it's not to the tune of a lot of dollars, sometimes Mr. Bowman or Mr. Hurley take their personal car and put in for mileage. I know Jim Gillerin, the former building inspector, just because it was his personal preference, well, I'm not sure why, but he used to use his town vehicle, his personal vehicle, and get reimbursed. But Generally, when you send a town employee out there to do a restaurant inspection or a septic inspection or a planning and zoning thing, I think it's good policy to have a town car, but that's not my decision.
Please.
So, I note on this item, it says, if I'm reading it correctly, possible replacement option is a police department SUV turn-in. So they had it in the back of their minds that that could be an option. I guess my question is, who decides who gets what? So I got a guy in conservation who says, I have a car that has 150,000 miles on it, it's in lousy condition, I need something new. And Mr. Becker makes a suggestion that maybe the police department can give one of their turn-in cars to conservation. Who decides that? Is it the police department gets to pick and choose, or is it you, or is it?
Well, the police department's the one that hands down the vehicles, and they have a full-time mechanic on staff who maintains their vehicles. And we have a fleet manager, Jeff Cornwall, who oversees basically the department vehicles. So he's their serviceman, so when planning and zoning or conservation needs a vehicle, they will, work with Mr. Cornwall on their needs.
I'm just saying, you've anticipated getting these 2 Ford Explorers from the police department, correct? That
Well,
you-
they're coming down.
They're coming
correct.
down, okay. So, Mr. Tetchell probably can answer my question. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think historically, I think it's been done a little informally in this past year. We put together a formal process, so we sat down starting in October with every department that uses vehicles and said, okay, where are we, what do we need? So that those decisions are made with everybody's input from each of the departments. The kind of next step is part of what I think is started to be talked about here, which is, one is we get the vehicles down from the police department. Is that the best approach? What's it cost to run those cars, especially in the last years of their lives? So the next step in our process is take a look at what the cost, the maintenance cost and the operational cost is for those, and to see in some cases, especially with town inspections, we don't need a police car. We don't need an SUV. We don't need something that's substantial. That in fact, can we spend less money, get a new car that is not as sturdy, but doesn't need to be as sturdy to drive from one restaurant to another as we go through town. So that's kind of the next step in our process there. But the first one was to establish a formal process by which all the players got together so we could set the priorities with everybody's input.
Thank you, Mr. Tetro. Maybe when that process is complete, we can share the process with the boards, once you have it set and done.
Well, the first part of it is complete in terms of allocating the vehicles out. The second part, in terms of what I'll call the operational side, the financial analysis on the back end, that's what we need to do. That is not done yet.
Okay.
But
thank
be
you.
happy to share that when we is.
Great, thank you. Mrs. Leclerc?
Could I just follow up? Are all the cars that are being replaced from the police department being funneled to another department? Or
Yes, that's what we sit down and do. It's a little bit like Christmas morning where the police chief says we have 8 gifts.
Yep.
And who gets them this year?
Okay.
All right, and that's taken, and to be fair, we do that with each of the departments so they can identify what's being used. And as Joe mentioned, with the DPW maintenance worker who's involved in maintaining them. So that's the second voice of somebody saying, this one needs to go because we're going to have to replace the tranny if it doesn't, so let's get it out of here now before that has to happen.
Can you tell the board where all 8 are going so we have a better understanding?
Off the top of my head, no, but I believe Joe has that laid out for you.
Yes, I do. And just, one clarification, and the email that I sent to Mr. Walsh today and I also copied Mr. Flynn on it, it had a whole bunch of vehicles on it, and Mr. Flynn referred to them as vehicles with 20,000 and 30,000. Those are not being replaced, just the higher-end vehicles on that list is. But out of the police department vehicles, the 2 Ford SUVs that are being down in the fleet, one is intended for the building department. The other is intended for one of our public works manager, the tree warden specifically. The 4 Crown Vics that are coming down the pike, we envision 2 of those going to the building department to replace current Crown Vics, one for the engineering department, one for the health department. There is a utility van which we will use in our public works building maintenance unit, And the last one is a Crown Vic, which will be used by the fire department.
Okay.
And once again, this doesn't cover the whole packet. There are still, probably a half a dozen of those 1998 Honda Civic natural gas vehicles with low mileage that will stay in the fleet for this year. They're not going away. And that was the point I was making when you were
Yeah. let me
talking.
see it then.
Not all of these on this list are getting out of service, just the underlined ones on the email. there.
Right. And the underlined ones are Health Department, Honda Civic, 60,000 miles.
So the
Engineering Department, Honda Civic, 50,000 miles.
Yep.
Health Department, 1998 Honda Civic, 90,000 miles. Building Department, 2006 Ford, 70,000 miles. Building Department, 2006 Ford Crown Vic, 80,000 miles. Those are the ones that are subject to be replaced.
correct.
Yeah.
So if we take this out of the budget, is there a car to replace it? That's what I'm confused about. Or are they keep the Chevy Tahoe for another year?
What basically the implication is that you could repurpose one of the cars from the
That
police
way.
department, and instead of actually replacing one of these,
Mhm.
send them to the conservation and leave one of these in service for an extra year. Because next year, you're back up to your full complement, presumably, of police cars, where you're buying 10 instead of 8, and they're doing the SUVs now, so you're swapping them down. That was one of the thought processes.
Yeah, because if I may, you're going to get
Please.
more SUVs coming up pretty soon. I mean,
Right.
it's starting to happen because they've been going a couple of years now with them, so you will see more of them come downstream, but also still a mix, so there will be other vehicles.
And just in my own opinion, I think there should be an analysis done. All right, this is my own personal viewpoint. If you've got a car, forget natural gas, whatever, if you've got a car that you've had for 17 years that you've got 20,000 miles on, I'm terribly sorry. You didn't get your money's worth out of that car. And now at this point, we got to get rid of the car, not because we've driven it to death, but because it's past its useful life because it's a natural gas vehicle. So I question whether we need a fleet that big or not. And why should we be paying for a fleet that big if you've got a whole bunch of cars that are 17 years old and have that kind of mileage on them? That's my own personal. Mr. Becker?
Yeah, and I agree on doing that analysis. The only thing I would want to make sure, it's my take, maybe if you're IT and you're moving from one building to another, but if you're going to be frontline, like if you're inspecting a restaurant, something like that, I do like to see them in a town vehicle, and with the town seal and sort of, I think there's a important element to that. So I mean, I wouldn't want to go so far just to not have that happen, but that's a perception thing. But
One last question on it.
Mr. Brown?
Not to beat a dead horse, what do we do with the retired vehicles? Where do they go?
You mean when they're totally gone?
Yeah, but like, the ones that are in red and underlined, where do they go?
We dispose them as surplus through our purchasing department. So they would.
And what
handle
happens? Like, what does that mean?
Well, through some sort of auction, either municipal auction, but that's handled by our purchasing agent.
So we sell them?
Correct.
Okay, and then where does those funds go?
As revenue to the general fund.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Yes, Mrs. Cookleman, please.
I know we've really talked this one out, but
That's fine.
it's just unclear to me still that if we cut this, there's a car available for conservation. That's just not clear to me yet, and I don't disagree with the thought process at all. It would be fabulous if we could repurpose a car. It just, in this conversation, I haven't become clear that, in fact, there will be a car for them to use.
I don't know that I personally can't get you clear on that. What I do know is they have 8 cars that are going to be retired from the police department. Currently, they have a list of how those 8 cars are going to be utilized, okay? What they're going to replace. What the argument could be made is maybe they don't have to replace these. Maybe they replace one in conservation, and they continue to use one of these until such time as they don't need it anymore.
Sorry, just one more follow-up.
Sure.
Sorry. So I guess my question then is that for us to say? who's ultimately making
No.
those decisions,
It's not
right?
for us to say. It's for them to prioritize. It's for us to say whether we want to spend the money or not. Absolutely. Any other questions, comments? Seeing none, I'll call for a vote on this adjustment. So it was Mr. Becker's adjustment, I believe. Capital outlay, 2014 Ford Escape, $28,000 in the Conservation Department to remove this item. All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Okay, that item comes out. You have the count, Deb?
710.
Thank you. And can somebody please go get Mr. Walsh? He is just outside the door. Thank you, Mr. Lesson. All right. He's in the lounge, is that what somebody said? Yes.
It's better you don't. Plausible deniability.
You get Mr. Walsh?
Yeah.
Okay. Conservation, anything else? Seeing none, Mr. Walsh, you're back for the Shellfish Commission.
You guys got to pick it up.
Yeah. Shellfish Commission, any adjustments? Seeing none, we'll go to Legal Services. Any adjustment? Seeing none, Miscellaneous Contingency. Any adjustment? None. Human Resources. Okay. Human Resources, I'm going to have one adjustment here, myself, and I'm going to refer back to the document that we saw earlier, and I'm going to ask for some help on my motion. Under a proviso on the town side of do no harm, on the internal service fund, under town active medical, I'd like to make a motion so that we bring this net profit and loss for the year-to-date to zero, and that would be by adding $59,297 to the appropriate expense line. And Mrs. Gardner, what's the most efficient way to do that?
Yeah, I'm going to adjust it. Tom, you might want to just adjust that to 59,099 because the Board of Selectmen increased the town budget to reflect February claims by the $198.
By the $198. I'm sorry, you're losing me there.
The Board of Selectmen adjusted health care
Right.
by $198 just to true it up to the February claims.
Right. So where would I put the 59,297? Where are you recommending?
Well, I'm recommending that the 59,297 be actually 59,099. 'Cause
Perfect,
you already-
okay.
Okay, and now I'm suggesting you put it in human resource budget, supplemental risk management. That's where we usually put
And can
this
you
to
give me that
sweep
line
it
item?
into.
Just,
Sure, it's
having problems
58960.
focusing. 58960, there it is, thank you. So I'd like to make that motion to add 59,099. The supplemental contribution risk management, 58,960, and that is to true up and give us the net profit and loss based on best available information on the medical account to zero. Do I have a second in my motion? This is Leclerc with the second. Questions, comments, concerns on my motion? Okay, seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Okay, that item carries. Anything else? Thank you, everyone. Anything else on human resources? Nothing on human resources. Okay, we're going to go to community and economic development. I see nothing. We're going to go to harbor management. Commission, anything? Nothing. Okay, now we're going to go into the miscellaneous area. Going to go into contingency? Nothing. Contribution to surplus, I think we're right where we need to be on this, correct? Nothing. Okay, the not-for-profits, what I'll do is, we call them the so-called not-for-profits or the agencies, miscellaneous. So I can read these right down and ask if anybody has anything on anything, any one of them. Regional Youth Adult Social Action Partnership, Pequot Library, Fairfield Consulting Services, Discovery Museum, Greater Bridgeport Regional Council, Audubon Society, Greater Bridgeport Transit Authority, Fairfield Museum and History Center, Fairfield Veterans Advisory and Information Services, Southwest Connecticut EMS Council, Southwest Regional Mental Health Board, Janus Center for Youth, Grassmere by the Sea, Sullivan McKinney Elder Housing, the Kennedy Center, Mill River Wetlands Committee, Pilot House, and the Center for Family Justice. Seeing none? No questions, comments? We'll move forward from that. Okay. That, I believe, will bring me to private school bus transportation. Thank you, Mr. DeWitt. Any questions, comments on that? Health and Welfare Services. Seeing none. Finance Department. I'd like to eliminate the CFO. No, I'm kidding. Just wanted to see if you were awake. We got a second for that motion. No. Okay. Finance. Anything. Okay. And Mr. Mayor, I'd like to thank you and your team for your hard work and effort. I'd also like to thank you for the job description. That was most helpful. Purchasing Department. The Assessors Department. The Tax Collectors Department. Information Technology. Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If we can go to line item 53000, IT software. With the budget of $564, I'd like to make a motion to reduce that by $60,000. That's based on new information.
I second that motion. Questions, comments on that motion? $60,000. That's based on new information in consultation with Mr. Mayor.
That's correct.
Okay. Any questions, comments, concerns?
Mr. Mayor confirms that.
Okay. Seeing none, all in favor of this adjustment? Those opposed? Abstentions? Nothing. Unanimous. Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If we could go to line item 57000, capital outlay. Currently at $259,000. I'd like to make a motion to bring that line item back to last year's budget level to $115,000 and move $144,000 to contingency.
Okay, would you like to speak to that, Mr.? I'll do a second to that. Would you like to speak to that?
I think at this point, with this department having a little bit of discussion on what the capital outlay will be for next fiscal year would be appropriate to the boards.
Okay. Do we have any questions, comments, or concerns on this right now? Seeing none, all in favor of Mr. Brown's transfer? Opposed? Abstentions? We are good there. Any other comments, questions, concerns on the information technology budget? Seeing none, we'll move on. The Board of Finance. Okay. Unemployment compensation.
CFO wants to do something with that.
Yeah. Not allowed. Unemployment compensation. Okay. We are done with the finance side of our budget. We're now into public safety, and we're into the fire department budget. Do we have any adjustments to the fire department budget at this time? Mr. Mayor, do we have any new information? There was some talk there about an IT software package that they were having trouble whether they would implement or not. And the question wasn't whether it was worthwhile to implement that software package. It was a tracking software, as I recall. The question was they were having problems with the vendor and they didn't know whether they would implement it at all. Do we have any information on that?
I know that the Board of Selectmen reduced the fire budget by $5,000
Okay,
due
and
to
that
a
was-
software item that they're
Got
not
it.
using.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions or comments on the fire department? Seeing none, we'll go to the police department. Okay. We'll go to the animal control department. No comments there. Okay. We'll go to the street light department. Street light cost. Seeing none. We'll go to the hydrant and water. Nothing there. And we'll go to emergency management. Okay. The Emergency Communications Center? Nothing. Okay, we are done with the public safety part of our review. We're now into Public Works Administration. Do you have any adjustments to Public Works or Administration? Seeing none, we'll go to Public Works Operations. Public Works Operations. Mr. Walsh.
I'm going to make a proposed motion to, under their capital account, to remove number 10, Supervisor's SUV. This replaces number 132, a 1999 SUV with 155,000 miles, so a reduction of $29,500.
Do we have a second to that motion? Get Mr. DeWitt on a second. Discussion on the motion?
Well, I will say that the reason I want to reduce that is that there's a fleet of cars that they have access to. There's several coming from the police department, specifically 2 SUVs. The Public Works Department is going to be getting 7 of the 8 cars coming, two of which will be SUVs. I'm asking them to manage that, that fleet. We will soon be getting a regular group. I don't know if it'll be next year, but within a couple of years, they'll be getting probably like 8 SUVs a year as we go to an all SUV or primarily all SUV patrol car. So I'm just asking that they manage that and figure out how they want to work it. But I just don't feel like buying a $29,000 SUV when we're going to start having a flood of SUVs coming down the pike from the police department on a yearly basis.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Any other questions, comments? Mr. Stone?
We're already taking a car from the list, right?
We did.
So
That's
now-
correct.
You weren't here. So now we're taking 2 from that list.
Correct.
I mean, I don't know if we, personally, I think, you know, with a car with 155,000 miles on it, it's time to replace it, and I don't know where the new cars, or the used cars, I know where a new car can come from, I don't know where the used car's coming from.
Well, I don't care whether they use one of the ones that's supposed to go to the building department or wherever it comes from. When we're buying 8 SUVs to 10 SUVs a year at this point in time, and we're going to be having them come off at that same clip on a yearly basis, so we will be having 8 to 10 SUVs coming offline shortly. Someone's going to have to make something work for the next year or so until we get to that point, because I'm not buying more SUVs just to start having a bigger fleet of SUVs. That's my point.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. All right, call for a vote on this. All in favor of this reduction of this SUV? Opposed? Abstentions? None, so that's 7-2 as well. Okay, any other comments on DPW, Public Works?
I do have a comment. Unless
Please,
anybody else-
Mr.
somebody
Walsh.
else does. And I have to say that I did a bunch of research on this, and I have to say I got a lot of cooperation from Scott Bartlett and Chief McNamara in regards to the dramatic increase in line 53-200, the 71% increase of fees and professional services, which has an increase of pretty much $110,000, a 71% increase. And when we had Mr. Bartlett before us and we asked him what the reasoning was for that, we got into a discussion in regards to the payment for basically flag services at DPW jobs, and also for contracted services jobs that were being done for the town of Fairfield. And I wanted to know from them whether there was any possibility of coming to some type of agreement of either, one, reducing, either not charging the town, two, reducing the fee that they charge, the police charge to the town, or trying to find some common ground on this whole matter to try to reduce it. Because if you recall, Mr. Bartlett stated that if he was able to use an outside flag company, he has a contracted price of $26 an hour on our DPW jobs. When he has to use police, which the police commission is requiring for what they call safety reasons on 20% of our roads, it's at a rate of $57 per hour. And we talked about it. We never really got anywhere with it. There was no new really information that I saw that was, although I wasn't here for the public safety night because I was at a wake. But in going back and forth, it seems like there can be some common ground found and some savings to the town. The bottom line is, out of that $100,000, on a lot of this goes to when paving's being done in this town, that we should try to, at least try to get some of that $50,000 back and put it into the roads. And what I would like to see done, you know, and I will say everyone's been very forthright. There's been a lot of cooperation between Public Works and the police department. It wasn't always that way. There's been, you know, shifts in that. But we've got to figure out a way to recoup this, because certain towns, like I think it's New Canaan and Westport, their DPWs are exempted under this plan. I think we have to look outside the box and, one, see whether we can charge a different rate to the town, something closer to the 26, maybe not fully down there, and charge maybe a slightly higher rate and figure out our costs to private companies.
Mr.
But
Walsh?
something needs to be done, and I'd like the first selectman to direct this and maybe report back to us by like our October meeting.
Mr. Walsh, when they use this outsourced firm, are they comparable to what our police do?
I guess, I mean, there's different services that each provide. Clearly, the police are a police force that our citizens recognize, and they carry a badge and a gun and you know, whatever. The private all-state service that, it was described to me, they wear a lot more fluorescent stuff. They use a more of a handheld sign about stop or slow or things like that. They have
But they're
walkie-talkies.
professionally trained.
Yeah, and from what I understand, Allstate certifies our own police department, from what I was told. But I think that more work needs to be put into this to see. There's nothing we can do tonight. It got very complicated, and both sides had points, and also both sides seemed very cooperative and wanting to work through it. I think maybe if the first selectman can work with all sides on this and report back to us, but by the time we get to the next budget, I'd like to see some type of savings in this area and trying to work together. I mean, I would like our police to be able to work into that. They know our streets, they know our citizens, they know our town. But there seems, and I don't know whether it's a legal situation where we can charge two different rates, one to the town, one to outside services. I don't know what it is, but some more research needs to be done. because currently, right now, the police commission is requiring that there be police if it's after, I think, over an hour and a half or 2 hours, on jobs that are covered 20% of the town, 50 miles. They will have a list of streets. It's approximately like 40-something streets. But I think more can be done. So I'm not going to touch the line now, now that this has come up, but I would ask that the administration report back to us in October. If they need more time, they can tell us, but before the next budget season, certainly, so we can see if there's savings on this line. So based on that, I would like to get some type of sense of our body to suggest we want that done.
Can you
So
make a
I'm gonna
formal
make- I'm going to make a motion as a sense of our body that we'd like the administration to work with all sides on this to see whether there are savings that can be generated before the next budget season in this area.
Okay. Do you want to put that in the form of a motion?
Yes. So I make a motion of a sense of a body that the administration work with Public Works and the Police Department and Fire, and the Police Commission to see if there's any savings that can be garnered in regards to the requirement of the using police as flag people during DPW jobs and contracted services jobs.
Do we have a second to that motion? We'll go with Mr. DeWitt. Any discussion, comments on that? Mr. Mottola?
You phrased your motion the right way. I think the language is to see. All right, I'm not sure that there will be, but I agree it's worth exploring. Thank you.
All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? That item carries. Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Mr. Mayor?
The first meeting on that subject is scheduled for 9:30 Monday morning.
Is when?
Scheduled for 9:30 Monday morning.
Thank you. That was quick work. I'm glad. Thank you, Mr. Walsh. All right. All right, let's move forward. Anything else on the Department of Public Works? We'll go to the Building Department. Seeing none. We'll go to the Engineering Department. Seeing none. All right, we are done with that area of the budget, and we are now into Health and Welfare. Anything in the Health Department? None. Human and Social Services? And nothing right now. Solid Waste and Recycling? None. We are done with that department. We are into Culture and Recreation. The Library? Anything on the Library this evening? Okay. Penfield Pavilion Complex? Okay. Parks and Recreation? The Waterfront and the Marina? Carl Dickman Golf Course? And the Smith Richardson Golf Course? Anyone? Seeing nothing. I will come back to the Board of Education, if you don't mind. Let's go to retiree benefits. There were some adjustments done at the Board of Selectmen level for some minor tweaks for new information. Is there any other questions, comments on retiree benefits? Mr. Mayor, we're covering our requirements here as we have the last number of years for our contributions?
That's correct, for meeting the ADC.
Thank you. Debt service, we're covering our debt service per our waterfall schedules?
That is correct, sir.
Nothing there.
I do have a comment to make about debt service.
Yes, Mr. Walsh, please.
My comment about debt service is the special year we're having with debt service this year, and that we do not have a 90% band payment to be payable this year, which is, in a way, bringing our budget down, which I think is a great thing. And it's helping us get to the low rate that we're getting to. However, since that number is not there, next year's budget, we will be having to, it's basically having to find this 1.1, 1.2, maybe after the refinancing, it could be brought down as low as 900,000. But for all intents and purposes, we're going to have to look at it as finding fresh money next year, which is going to be hard for us to bring a budget in for less than 3% next year. I know I've spoken here before, and I don't want to waste time, and I didn't want to, Tilted Windmills, making motions to increase some costs, which I know many of you don't want to do, because I thought about paying some things now in advance, including the software costs, including maybe buying a DPW truck, in order to smooth the tax increase for next year. Many of you have expressed you don't want to do that. You're hoping that maybe something will, and I pray that you're right, that something will come in. But we are staring in the face a 3% tax increase next year, which I think is an unsustainable amount. I am going to fight against that 3% tax increase next year. And I don't want to waste people's time making motions to increase costs this year to pay for things for next year. So I just wanted to make that statement that our debt service, we're going to have to, we know going in, we're going to have to find about $1 million next year.
Mr. Walsh, thank you. Thank you very much for your comments. Other questions, comments on debt service? Seeing none, we'll go back to the Board of Education. This is our last, if I'm correct, Mr. Mayor and Mrs. Gardner, this is our last town-related, and the Water Pollution Control Authority is separate. So the Board of Education budget is now before us. Questions, comments, concerns on the Board of Education budget? Okay. The one item that I will note on the Board of Education budget that I want to hold us to, because I think it's been very collaborative this past year, and that relates to the medical insurance issues. And I want to first extend my thanks and appreciation to the administration and to the Board of Education for reaching out to our board through myself, as well as to the Board of Selectmen through Mr. Tetro, and soliciting our help and our opinions on behalf of our boards related to this topic. I would ask that you agree to the concept of do no harm, which is that we cover whatever that medical increase is going to be out of your budget. We don't know what that's going to be right now, but it'll be set pretty much by the time the RTM votes. And the goal there would be for you to hold to that and manage your budget. I think Mr. Walsh alluded to this during our discussions earlier in the budget cycle, that this is the one of the areas where we share responsibility, right? It's a shared account. And as Mr. Mayor said, the Internal Service Fund is viewed in one totality by the credit rating agencies. And we live in that together. And so if you're short, we expect that it be made whole so that we don't have a negative situation there. And you should have better available information by the time the RTM votes next month on that topic. And that's my view. Right now, you look to be somewhere in the $80,000, $90,000 range, and that needs to be made up in order to do no harm year over year. I don't know if anyone has anything to add to that or disagrees with that. Anybody on our board? Or is that pretty much the sense of the board? Accurate. Okay. Anybody else on the Board of Education budget? Mr. Walsh?
Are we doing anything with their internal service fund money?
That's what I was saying. They need to make that up out of their budget.
So don't we have to increase their budget?
No.
Okay. So whatever it is, it is.
Whatever it is, and it's got a month, and maybe they have better experience in a month, once it's from the RTM. Because this was a big swing from one month to the next, correct, Mr. Mayor?
It was 1%. It brought the number into line with the current projections.
Right. But what it does is it drops them to do a little bit of harm next year, right? And much like this year where they had those retirees and they had that savings and they threw it towards the medical, we expect very similar to make this up to the extent possible.
I'm going to make a motion. I'm making a motion to reduce the Board of Education budget by the, and Linda, correct me with the exact number, but the $367,000 and change number that the Board of Selectmen put in.
Do we have a second to that motion?
What's the exact number?
The number is 367,579.
Okay, 367,579? Okay, I'm making a motion to reduce. I expect the exact same thing that our chairman said, that they will still pay into the internal service fund, whatever that number works out. My reason for making the motion is that I still believe that at the current level, the amount that they requested is a 3.29% increase. And that extra $367,000, I expect them to find with efficiencies within their budget. I'm not going to tell them what they should save it on. There's new programs for various things. I'm just asking them, I think 3.29% is a sufficient increase in the budget and is still showing major support for their budget. I understand that they've had a new contract for teachers and administrators that ties their hands to a 3% increase. But I think 3.29 is a more than sufficient tax increase, and that they'll just have to find that the amount for the internal service fund through efficiencies within their own budget, however the Board of Education wants to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Do we have a second to that? Mr. Stone? Okay, that item is before us, an adjustment to the Board of Education budget. Mrs. Cook-Lippman.
Thank you. I won't be supporting that motion. I feel that the Board of Education budget has been cut consistently over the last several years, and that would make a big difference to the Board of Ed right now, and I don't want to see them cut into some of the services that were added in. I really think that this was a well-done, responsible budget by Dr. Title and his staff, and agree with the selectmen's decision to add that amount in, and I would hate to see it be taken out now.
Thank you.
I will state one factual point. The Board of Education's budget has increased every single year. There has not been one cut in their budget. It has gone up. It hasn't been always the amount that they wanted it to go up, but it has increased.
Any other questions, comments, concerns on this item? Seeing none, I'll call for a vote on it. All in favor, can you give me the exact number? 367, 538?
579.
367, 579. All in favor of a $367,579,000 reduction to the Board of Ed budget? All in favor? Those opposed? Thank you. That item fails. So the item is, the Board of Education budget is back before us as not adjusted from what the Board of Selectmen passed. Okay? Seeing no other comments, Mrs. Gardner, can you confirm for me that we went through every department of our budget? Okay, do you have specific numbers we should vote on in terms of revenue and total expenditures?
But don't forget, you're going to do water pollution control
We will do that separately. Please. How about we take a 2-minute recess and we'll come back and vote, okay?
5 minutes.
5 minutes.
5 minutes.
Okay.
Bob, give me a hug.
Can you give us the total dollar amount, please?
Yeah, there's two numbers I'm going to give you. The total expenditure number,
Correct?
$291,247,718.
Okay.
And then you'll also want to vote on the non-tax revenue numbers.
Okay.
$26,056,607.
607?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Would everybody be,
Collection rate, is that based on?
That's not based on any collection rate.
that's not we do that next
That,
time.
you do that in May.
Okay.
That's the fun we have then.
Yeah, exactly.
See
Okay,
if I can make it as exciting this year as last.
all right. Would anyone be object if I made the motion, for simplicity's sake? Okay, make a motion that we adopt the budget with non-taxable revenue of $26,056,607 and total spending of $291,247,718. Do I have a second to that? We'll go with Mr. DeWitt. Or actually, we'll go with Mr. Stone on that one. We'll make this bipartisan. Okay. Questions, comments on this? All in favor of the budget? Opposed? Abstentions? That budget passes. We are done with the town side budget. We do have one more budget. Thank you ladies and gentlemen in the audience.
Mr. Chairman?
Please, if you could just keep it down until you get outside. We do have one more budget we need to vote on. Would appreciate that, and thank you for being here this evening. Mr. Becker?
Do we know yet what the tax increase assumption is, the percentage with this adjustment now, the revenue?
We'll ask him to do that after we do water.
That's fine,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's around the
for
1.6
informational,
number.
Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, I'm correct in saying it's around the 1.6 number right now, correct?
I'm sorry, I was looking at WPCA.
The increase is 1.6, approximately 1.6 something.
Yes, the increase will be 1.6, 1.59, 1 point.
Right in that area.
Yeah, that's,
They'll calculate it directly.
thanks.
Okay, we're on page 311 of our budget book. This is Water Pollution Control Authority. Do we have any questions, comments, concerns on this budget?
What is the number for that?
I'm sorry. 130. Well, yeah, it's 130. 130, 130, 10.
Thank you.
Sure. Does anybody have any questions, comments, concerns on this budget? Seeing none, I believe this is our last voting item. Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, the adjusted number, including the Board of Selectmen adjustments,
Please.
$5,409,191.
And what was the adjustment here?
There was OPEB adjustment and healthcare adjustment.
Thank you. Questions, comments? Seeing none, I'll call for a motion to approve this budget as amended by the Board of Selectmen. All in favor? Those opposed? Abstentions? Ladies and gentlemen, we are done. Before we adjourn for the evening, I'd like to thank everybody, Mr. Mayor, Mrs. Gardner, your staffs. I'd like to thank you very much for all your hard work and effort. Mr. Tetro, please extend our appreciation to your department heads and your administration, as well as yourself, sir. Deb, thank you so much. We couldn't do it without you. I'm sorry you have to listen to us and re-listen to us again. To my colleagues on the board, thank you very much for your hard work and most of all for your good humor. It makes a very long month a little less long and a little bit more fun, so it's greatly appreciated. So with that, I'll entertain a motion. We'll go with Mr. Stone, Mr. SUV, and we'll take the second from Mr. DeWitt. All in favor of adjournment? Opposed? Abstentions? We're done, everybody. Good night.